Good evening, everyone. Welcome this beautiful evening to Gita discussion with Lakshmi. We're on the 13th chapter, around the 22nd text on Bhagavad Gita. Good evening, everyone. Welcome this beautiful evening to Gita discussion with Lakshmi. We're on the 13th chapter, around the 22nd text on Bhagavad Gita. So everyone, welcome. Beautiful evening to discussion with Laksmi. We're on the 13th chapter, around the 22nd. Well, that's interesting. Let's see what we got here. How's that? Yeah, that's better. Okay, so let's begin. Start with our invocation mantras. Om Jnanatimmarandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Dena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapodantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirbhishesha Shunyavadi Vastutyadi Shatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Okay, let us begin our Gita study. On chapter 13. Text 22. Text 22. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil amongst various species. So, Gita, Krishna in the Gita, goes through great lengths to establish the distinction between Prakriti and Purush earlier in the Gita. So with that established, the difference that Prakriti is the material energy made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego, and has the constitution or the constituents of the gunas. The gunas are the influences, the influencing agents of those material elements. So when this point here that Krishna is making is when the living entity and the whys and wherefores of the living entity's connection to the material energy, Srila Prabhupada actually states, and even Bhaktivinoda Thakur previously has stated, it's very difficult to get into why the living entity has come in contact with the material energy, and it really is not such an important consideration to try to figure that out. Bhaktivinoda Thakur uses the metaphor that if you're shot with an arrow, you don't try to figure out where the arrow came from. First thing you try to do is get the arrow out of you. So at our level of advancement, a level of understanding, we should understand what the modes of material nature are and how to get free from their influence. So these modes, when the living entity is put in connection with the material energy and the living entity embraces that connection, it is described here in Bhagavad Gita, in these verses, that that living entity, due to its association with material energy, is influenced by it. And we see, practically, who we associate with affects us. If we associate with, people who like to party and drink and smoke and do all those things, the eventual effect of that association is, we'll want to do the same things. Or, if we're devotees, maybe not do them, but have our minds disturbed by those kinds of thoughts, because everything that we put in to our mind via the senses creates impressions, samskaras they're called. So the association is very important. A bird, the old saying, the old English saying, birds of a feather flock together. So when we're associating with the material elements, Krishna very definitively says that the Supreme and all of its manifestations as Brahman, as Paramatma, as Bhagavan, or as the all-pervading, unchanging, imperishable energy of the Supreme, that is the creation of everything, as Paramatma, the super soul within the heart and within all atoms, of every living entity, thus giving us the presence of divinity everywhere in this material world through his manifestation as Paramatma, and ultimately Bhagavan, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That these three manifestations of the Supreme, when we associate with the Supreme in that way, with God in that way, then we are influenced. That we do not become God, but we become godly. That means we begin to think in a way that creates a suitable environment to establish a loving relationship with the Supreme. So association is extremely important. It's one of the primary limbs of bhakti, proper association. And here, Krishna is saying, when the living entity embraces the material energy, influenced by that association, what happens as a result? The Supreme is unchangeable. His manifestation as the jiva, unchangeable. Krishna says that in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, when he's in the Sankhya Yoga explanation. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Krishna's talking about the soul. And then Krishna makes a distinction between that eternal, unchangeable, imperishable soul and the material body, dehinosmin yata dehe, kamoram jovanam jara, tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. That what is changing is the body. The body is changing. But the soul is never changing. The soul remains constant. The soul remains unchangeable. Again, Krishna says later on that just as one changes his garments, today we may be wearing a green shirt, and then tomorrow we'll be wearing maybe a white shirt or a red shirt. So just as one may change his garments, the soul, the eternal, unchanging soul, sheds his garments at the time of death. That is what death is according to Gita. So while that fact has been established by Krishna, the unchangeability of the Supreme Lord, the unchangeability of his part and parcels, the jiva, what is changing is prakriti, or the material energy. And when we associate, as we established before, when we associate with someone or something, the influence is there. So when the jiva comes in connection or contact with material energy, that association of the gunas or the influences of the material energy affect consciousness and delude the living entity into thinking that we are that body, that changing set of circumstances is us and is part of our existence. So in this verse, Krishna is establishing, thus he meets with good and evil amongst various species. Text 23, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Supersoul. So while Krishna has gone to great lengths to establish the presence of the soul, the jiva, the atman, in the body, the material field, and is the knower of the field that it is in, Krishna here is now making another statement. Now he's establishing another fact, that within that field, within that body, within that prakriti nature that we are associating with, due to mercy, unfathomable mercy, Krishna appears as Paramatma or Super Soul. And the words he uses here in this verse, the overseer and the permitter. So Krishna is overseeing all things. Sarvasya chaham ridi sanivishto matak smritir jnanam abhonam cha. That he oversees. He knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. And he's the permitter. He allows the living entity to pursue the desires which arise from connection with that material energy, from embracing that material energy. So here Krishna is establishing that in text 23. Presence of Jiva, presence of the super soul. Okay, let's read 24. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. And Krishna reiterates this point in the 14th chapter. One who understands the working nature of the modes of material nature achieves liberation. So here again, he's saying that one who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So texts 24 through 26 will describe the result of understanding this knowledge. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, clear understanding of material nature, the super soul, the individual soul, and their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. So, the question is, are there methods to gain liberation other than just described? Text 25 reads, some perceive the supersoul within themselves through meditation, where through the cultivation of knowledge, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. So what is Krishna describing here? Who can tell me what Krishna is describing here, text 25? Perception of the super soul within themselves through meditation. What is that? Anyone? How about you, Shaktiman, you know?
No, Prabhu.
Okay, this is Dhyana Yoga. Dhyana Yoga. Like what Krishna is describing in the 6th chapter of the Gita, the yoga of meditation. Dhyan. Dhyan means yoga, meditation. So the yoga of meditation. So Krishna is saying, the question was asked, are there methods to gain liberation? Krishna gives the answer. Some perceive the super soul through dhyana yoga, within themselves, through meditation. Others through the cultivation of knowledge. That's jnana yoga. So others can perceive the nature, the relationship of the soul with material nature and the gunas and all those interactions through the process of jnana yoga, or knowledge. Specifically, jnana yoga concerns itself with the Upanishads. So that's another method. And still others through working without fruitive desire. So this is nishkama karma yoga. Karma yoga without desires, developing the ability to perform yoga or the linking process by action. Jnana yoga, dhyana yoga tries to get away from interacting within mundane society because of the influence that brings. So But karma yoga, nishkama karma yoga, the action yoga, the action yoga that is trying to be detached from the fruits of one's activities, that is also there. And Patanjali talks about that also in the Yoga Sutras when he elaborates on Kriya Yoga. So Kriya, Karma Yoga, this is what. So Krishna right here gives the three options. These three options achieve different results. And see, this is an important point for you to understand, and also when you're dealing with other people that are involved in yoga. Now, some people are just involved with the physical aspect of yoga to get their bodies into good shape. But if there's someone that understands there's more to yoga than just the asana, just the physical postures to get your body into shape and your mind peaceful, then you can explain to them clearly, just by this verse here, that different yoga processes yield different results, or we'll say different perspectives or realizations of the Supreme, either through karma yoga, jnana yoga, or dhyana yoga. Prabhupada describes in jnana yoga, one cannot understand any other manifestation of the Supreme other than Brahman, because there's lots of mental speculation and there's lots of attempts at acquiring knowledge of the nature of the Absolute. But Prabhupada is very clear, bhakti comes when there is humility and submission to the Supreme, because then there is grace. So bhakti yoga is called the path of grace, whereas the other paths, dhyana yoga, path of meditation, you read in Yoga Sutras, in Ashtanga yoga and Kriya yoga, very much a path, very much a discipline to achieve connection with the true nature of the self. And according to the Vaishnavas, you don't read this so much except in Vaishnava texts. You don't read it in the Yoga Sutra so much. More Patanjali emphasizes connection with the true nature of the self, the spiritual nature of the self. Whereas Vaishnavas see dhyana yoga in the nature of the self, yes, is realized, but also the other presence within the prakritic nature, and that is Paramatma, or Super Soul. So, as I said, this is more an understanding which comes from Vaishnavism rather than Advaitin philosophy. They don't deal with Super Soul because they feel all manifestations of the Supreme that have form are part of the illusory energy. So that is the understanding that's coming from this verse. Yeah, there are ways and means to develop a perspective of the Supreme according to how you approach Him. And what does Krishna say? I believe it's the 4th chapter. As they surrender unto me, I reward accordingly. To paraphrase that as you approach me, how you approach me, then there's reciprocation. So the approach of the Gyanis is that they want to know the nature of the Supreme. So the only realization that they can have is the Brahman manifestation of the Supreme. And through meditation, the only nature that they can come in contact with is through the soul, realizing the soul's eternal nature, Satchidananda nature, its eternity, knowledge, and bliss, but also realizing that next to the soul dwells the Super Soul of Paramatma. So that is there. So 26 reads as follows. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So it's described here that hearing with faith from authorities has great potency. So that means knowledge is not the main consideration, but having faith in the hearing process and hearing from the proper authorities, authorized, bona fide authorities, this brings on realization of the Supreme Person and develops attachment, devotion, ultimately love. And we can use a few examples out of the Bhagavatam. One such example is the fruit vendor. Her hearing about Krishna in Vrindavan developed an attraction to Krishna. And the more she heard about him, the more her desire to see him or to attain his association developed within her heart. Also Rukmini, by her hearing about Krishna, developed a great attachment and love. That love within her heart manifested in full-blown love and devotion. So bhakti contains knowledge and vairagya, renunciation, but that is not important. When one has the ability to be humble enough to hear, that is a path within the construct of bhakti by which one can make advancement, and as Prabhupada says here, that can also transcend the path of birth and death. Text 27, O chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. So all forms of life, all species of life, be they tree species, aquatic species, reptile species, mammal species, all species, Krishna is saying here, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Because if it has life, a tree has life, so according to Gita, that life is due to the presence of the soul within the tree. So non-moving living entities and moving living entities, you know that to be the combination of the field of activities, the body, this lump of earth, water, fire, air, ether, and the subtle aspect of it, the mind, intelligence, and the ego, that field, due to the presence of the living entity, there's interaction. So all know that whatever you see in existence to be the fact. And that's how we see the oneness. When sometimes they talk about oneness as Brahman, but devotee sees oneness as that all living entities are equal, sees with an equal vision. The Brahmin, the dog eater, all of these is the vision, the equal vision, the oneness vision in terms of a bhakti yogi. Knowing by this verse, that is why we have this perspective, and that's how we can have this perspective. by this particular knowledge. Okay, text. Yeah, text 28. One who sees the supersoul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the supersoul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. So what is real vision? Equal vision? Understanding the living entity and the supersoul exist in all bodies, and that neither the soul nor the supersoul within the destructible body, Krishna specifically uses that adjective to make the distinction between soul and supersoul. The destructible body, that which changes, that element, that dimension of our existence which changes, that is the material elements, and that is not us. We are temporarily housed there as if we are renting an apartment. It's temporary. We have a lease, and you stay in that place until the lease expires, and then you move on, wherever it may be. So this is text 28, text 29. One who sees the supersoul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. Imagine having that vision of supersoul. That means you are, no matter who you are with, what living entity you are with, whether you are in nature, amongst the trees, the birds, the bees, you are in a community of people, you are always fortunate enough to have the supersoul presence in your life. What to speak of the realization of the supersoul being within your body. The analogy that is used, I believe it's the Svetashvatara Upanishad, of two green birds sitting in the tree. One is the witnessing bird, and the other one is the bird trying to enjoy the fruits of the tree. That is given in that Upanishad as an analogy of what's going on within the body, with the soul and the presence of the supersoul. So that's does not degrade himself by his mind. What does that mean? Who knows? Who can guess? Give a shot at what that means. How does one degrade oneself by their mind? I mean, the mind is such an integral part of our existence. How can the mind degrade us? What do you think?
Thinking that we are bodies.
What's that?
Thinking that we are bodies.
Yeah, thinking we're the body and the mind itself. You know, when we are associating with that body-mind complex, the gross dimension and the subtle dimension, when we're thinking that is the degradation of the mind. Because then the mind has the perspective that these objects of the senses of that body and the desires that are emanating from the mind, that's me, that's coming from me. And it's really not. It's the pushings of the modes of material nature, pushing us in a particular direction. You know, when you see people in the bar, in bars, people in restaurants, you know, people making vain attempts to exploit this material world, and we can understand, because the strong presence of Rajagun and Tamagun, then that is why they are drawn to those activities and are attached to those inclinations, because thinking erroneously that I am the body and the mind therefore, the influence of the gunas is there, very, very much present, and it will cause us to have inclinations. I'm inclined to do this. You know, quite often you'll hear, if you talk to people, right? Maybe people at work, or, you know, people on the street, either friends or even family members, and, you know, I want, you know, I want to live life. I want the big house, and I want this, and I want that. You know, it's just, I'm inclined to those things, and this is my inclination. The devotee understands that that inclination for enjoyment, and not only enjoyment, but a specific type of enjoyment, is due to the presence of the gunas. So the bars are full because people are inclined, due to previous samskaras or previous impressions, are inclined to try to enjoy that way. And when you get into, you know, this understanding, you see it's not the soul that's acting that way, but the soul under the spell of the material and nature and the gunas, that the soul is inclined in these particular ways. That's why the hearing process is so very important, you know, to understand that we are more than this body and mind, and what is the future of the body and mind after all. That's why people get so depressed as they age, because what is the future? What I've invested in, what how I'm inclined to enjoy, is breaking down. The hearing's not so great anymore. The eyesight is not so great anymore. I know I'm going, those of you that are on now, you know that I'm 73 years old, and to see the decline in my vision from like when I was 60, more, you know, 10, 12 years ago till now, it's absolutely amazing to see the decline. The body strength, the body endurance, all of these things, as the clock ticks, is in decline. And, you know, if someone does not have this knowledge, imagine, what do they have to fall back on? As I've told you before, I was once a director of an assisted living facility and had to deal with many of the clients there, many people who came there. They were either put in there by their children who didn't want to take care of them, or they themselves had nowhere else to go. And, you know, what happens then? Your freedom is kind of taken away, and, you know, the limitations are there. You need assistance, even in remembering to take your medication. And that is like the biggest cause of, you know, senior depression, people who grow old and get depressed by it. Whereas we see, when one has this knowledge, has this realization of, I'm not the body, hooray! I'm not the body. Yeah, I'm here, but I'm really not the body. With that realization, and what I mean by realization, it's beyond words, it's beyond gyan. One of the secondary realizations that one has in the practice of bhakti yoga is the feeling of my eternality. Now we can actually feel the presence of the soul and can relate to its real nature. When we meditate on that, dwell on that, study that, these are how the ignorance of being attached to body and mind is dispelled. And also the purification that comes to us, to our hearts, by the presence of knowledge and the realization of my eternality. So so when one wants to live a quality life in old age, that's how it's done. We see the example, the life example, my son now and the young boys in his group, the Sunday group that they have where they're reading Ramayana, they're now reading Lilamrita, the story of Srila Prabhupada. And we see that as Prabhupada grew older and older, he became more and more joyous. Why? In the total service. The more he absorbed himself in service. See, because Bhakti Yoga, unlike other yoga systems, is not the negation of senses. Jnana Yoga, they try to negate sensory input, pratyahara, go within, etc. In Bhakti Yoga, it is the absorption of senses, not the negation of senses, which is the Bhakti Yoga process, which means everything that we are seeing, feeling, tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, all of these things, still we embrace them, but we embrace them with a different consciousness. The consciousness of connection to the Supreme. When we see the rising and the setting of the sun, what comes to mind? There's a Bhagavatam verse. See, all of these, anything that you can see, touch, taste, feel, there's either a Bhagavatam verse or some kind of meditation, Bhakti Yoga meditation that you can have. So through the rising and the setting of the sun, one cannot buy back time, even for all the wealth. No matter how much wealth you have, you cannot buy back 1 moment of time. The rising and the setting of the sun, that is the ticking of the clock, and you cannot buy it back for anything. So we see the rising and the setting of the sun as greater opportunities for service, for seva, for love, to cultivating our love and devotion for the Supreme Personality of God, Sri Krishna. That's how we see it. Yes, we see the beauty of the sun, but Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, I am the sun and I am the light of the sun and the moon. What a glorious realization it is when you're able to connect that momentous occasion of sunrise to the fact that that is Krishna. That is Krishna giving us his darshan. I am the light of the sun and the moon. And in the evening when we see the moon and feel the coolness and the peace that comes from the moon rays, and realizing that is Krishna Chandra, Surya Narayan. We have that realization. When we smell fragrance, sometimes here when the jasmine is in bloom, you could smell. You walk out our back door and you smell the fragrance. And you realize Krishna is the fragrance of the earth. And the earth in its manifestation is flowers. And that is how, even as we're growing old and our senses are getting weaker, we still have the glorious ability of connection and the joy, the ecstasy of that connection. When we meet another person, the ecstasy of coming in contact with another jiva. I am the ability in man, Krishna says. I am the super soul seated within the heart of all living entities, and from me come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. There are so many ways in Bhagavad Gita. There are so many ways that Krishna has given us to connect to dots. And what happens when those dots are connected? Remember when you were young and you had those sheets of paper with dots on it, and then you connected the dots, and all of a sudden there was a cat there. Initially they were just this dots on a page, and then you connected the dots. Connect dot 1 to dot 2, dot 2 to dot 3, and so on and so forth. And then at the end you have a form, something identifiable. While we're under the influence of Rajas and Tamagun, there's no we're not identifying. But when we are initially under the influence of Sattvagun and eventually Shuddha Sattvagun, the dots that are there, the light of the sun and the moon, the fragrance of the earth, the ability in man, all of these different dots that Krishna has placed before us and given us that wonderful opportunity to connect those dots at every moment of our day. Connect those dots. So even as we're getting older and the senses are getting weaker, the intelligence is getting sharper due to purification, where we can now we have the ability, as we walk through this planet, as we mingle with the various living entities in their various forms, we have the keenness of insight coming from purification by practicing bhakti yoga to connect the dots. So anywhere that we go, everywhere that we go, that there's Krishna. Even Prahlad Maharaj, when Hiranyakashipu said, is your God within this pillar? Yes, Father, he's within that pillar. And sure enough, when Hiranyakashipu smashed the pillar, there was Lord Nrsingadev. So that is our future. Our future is the more serious we can get in practicing bhakti in the Vaidhi stage, and eventually the Raganuga stage, the spontaneous stage, the more we'll become pure, our hearts become purified, and then the Lord will sit within that heart, just as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sat in the Gundicha Marg because of the cleanliness of that Marg, that temple, by Lord Chaitanya and his devotees. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, now we must make this place a suitable place for the Lord to sit. So when we're performing our sadhana, what are we doing? Now I am making this place, this heart, a suitable place for the Lord to sit. And sarvasya chaham ridi sarvishno, in the hearts of all living entities. By purification, we see that. We see that connection, that divine connection. So what is our future? Our future is joy. Joy at the connection, the connecting of the dots, and our ability to transform any situation into a Krishna conscious situation. Any situation. That's why it's described when we see a pure devotee coming out from a liquor store, that we understand that pure devotee has gone in there to spread Krishna consciousness, not to buy a bottle of liquor. So these things we should consider. Okay, well, I think we're on 30, right? One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai sarvasi. What's that verse? You remember that verse? Prakriti
Prakriti
kriyamanani
kriyamanani gunai
gunai
karmani
karmani sarvasaha.
ahankara
Ahamkara, right?
yeah,
Vimudhatma.
ahankara vimudatman.
And?
Kartaham itmani.
Yes.
Kartaham itmani.
Yeah. So Krishna says that in the 3rd chapter. He says, this is one who knows that these are the workings of the modes of material nature. 31. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. So let's read that again. So what is the Brahman perspective? When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies. So notice that what Krishna is saying here. Different identities due to different material bodies. He's not saying that we're all one, but he's saying that the identity that I am Lakshmi, 73-year-old Caucasian, or that's Sid, a 70-something-year-old Caucasian, or that is Shaktiman, whatever, I guess you must be in your 30s, Shaktiman, Indian-bodied, or Gayatri from Russia, or Gokula from Kazakhstan, all the various different identities, but those are identities of the body. But one who is sensible, therefore a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere. The jiva is everywhere. Keeping in mind what Krishna says, that Nityo nityanam chetanas chetanam eko bhavate yo vidate kama. And that there is the supreme eternal, and then the finite eternals, the innumerable eternals known as the living entities. He attains to the Brahman conception. So we have to understand, all bodies must one day cease to exist. That's a fact. Can anyone deny that fact? No matter how hard they're trying to extend or do away with death, the undeniable fact that these bodies will cease to exist. Therefore, when we see so many different individuals, we should stop seeing them as their fields of activity, the chapt that Krishna is talking about here in this. But they are both the soul there and the super soul. And they have nothing to do with matter. This, my friends, is Brahman vision. And what does a person with Brahman vision see? 32. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. So what do we have here? Krishna states clearly that only the body is changing. The soul is eternal and changeless. As the soul is nevertheless within his body, does he combine with it? That's the next question. 33. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. Krishna answers by saying that matter and spirit do not mix. So the question, within the soul within, does he combine with it? Krishna answers it. No, and he uses the analogy of the sky to give us an indication of how that can be. What is that? So we have just a few more minutes. I'll read 2 more verses. This is 34. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. Here Krishna offers a second example to explain the point he just made in text 33. Finally, he gives a 1-verse chapter summary. Text 35. Those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage and material nature, attain to the supreme goal. So, as is suggested by the chapter title, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, this chapter describes material nature, the super soul, and the living entity. And Srila Prabhupada sums up the chapter's main points by his purport. So we'll end right there. And we'll begin with chapter 14, one of my favorite chapters, the 3 modes of material nature. We'll begin with that next Wednesday. So if anyone has any question or comment or realization that you'd like to share, please.
I have a question.
Sid, go ahead, shoot.
So in the I guess the chapter before, not the chapter, but the number 33.
Mm-hmm.
The did you say that the soul does not change?
Right.
It's the mind that changes.
Yeah, the body and the mind, because both of them are material elements.
So the soul does not grow?
No, the soul does not grow. The soul is described as being 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. When Krishna, in the Upanishads, when there is an attempt to describe the finite nature of this spark of Brahman, that's what they give us in the Upanishads. So what grows and changes and goes through all of its permutations is material energy, the material energy which has been connected with the spark of spiritual energy. And just think of conception. What is conception? What happens at the time of conception? Sperm meets the ovum. The sperm is the activating force, right? It's the one that's swimming. It's the one that's moving. It's the one that has direction. And what's the ovum? The ovum is a cluster of cells. It's not moving. It only has cellular activity on that level. But when the sperm penetrates the outer covering of the ovum, and there is the impregnation of the soul, then you see Prakriti go through its changes. But the soul remains the same. What is uncovered in development is consciousness. you go from anamoy to pranamoy, pranamoy to manamoy, mind. Then from there you go to Gyanamoy and then Anandamoy. So that these are different levels. Anamoya means baby has consciousness. What does a baby do to realize its world?
Fucking.
Yeah, puts everything in its mouth.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's called anamoy. Grains means food into the mouth to realize the world around. As consciousness along with the body development expands, then there's pranamoy. What's pranamoy? Pranamoy is the realization that there are other living entities. Oh, there's my mommy, and there's my daddy, and there are my siblings. And oh, my siblings have friends. And then a little further, manamoy, my mind. Gyanamoy, knowledge. I see the world through knowledge. Anandamoy, the transcendental. So consciousness may expand with the expansion and changing of the material body, but it's consistent. Consciousness is always there, never changing.
I get it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question or comment or observation or realization? Okay.
I'm good.
I thank you all for attending. Always wonderful to have your association. So until we meet next week, please have a happy, healthy, and holy week. This 29th is the beginning of Kartik, a very special month for us to increase our meditation on the lotus feet of Sri Damodar and the chanting of that beautiful song. Namam Ishwaram Sachit Anandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Prajamanam Jashoda Biolukala Davamanam Param Vristam Antyam Tato Drutya Gopya. So we'll start singing that on the beginning of Kartik all the way through Kartik and be able to, through that wonderful transcendental sound vibration, to meditate on the Supreme Lord. So have a happy, healthy, and holy week, and love you all. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Babu. Thank you for the wonderful